Hi, I'm excited for our conversation this week with Dr. Glenda Clare. Now, Glenda Clare refers to herself as a health and behavioral health consultant because that's where her education and work experience is. But she is also an expert about grandparents raising grandchildren and everything that's involved in that. What's going on with social services, what's going on in the informal areas, such as within congregations, such as within communities. And so we're having a really interesting conversation this week about grandparents taking on that responsibility of raising grandchildren. And we all know that sometimes that responsibility comes to us and we're super excited for it. And other times it hits us, we're not prepared for it, and we're overwhelmed with just trying to keep up both physically and with everything going on in the world that has changed since we were little kids or since we were raising kids. A couple of things before we get into it. I want to remind you about the Buy Me a Coffee. It's a great way for you to support the show with a nominal amount that helps to offset the expenses of uploading and maintaining the podcast. So I would love to have you go to buymeacoffee.com/coolgrandpa and feel free to donate whatever you would like. You could make it a one-time, one-off donation, or you could set up a recurring account. Any support that you give me would be awesome, and I do appreciate everybody that has supported me previously. So, without further ado, let's jump into this really important conversation about grand families and grandparents raising those grandkids. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Dr. Glenda Clare, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I am looking forward to this conversation talking about grand families.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it too. I've been talking to lots of grandfathers and I'd love to share some of their experiences.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I would love for us to start out with is let's define this grand family and let's talk about how that's different from some of the other family types that might be out there.
Okay, so the definition that I provide for a grand family is this. A grand family is created when a grandparent or other family member raises the child of a relative unable to parent. Now, within that definition, there are grand families who are involved with the child welfare system and then those that are not involved in the child welfare system. I look at grand families as all of the relatives raising a relative's child, whether they are in child welfare or not. So kinship care is a term that is used for people who are in the child welfare system. I make the distinction. Grand families is everybody. Kinship is child welfare.
Okay. Now, how's this different between intergenerational families that might be living together?
Okay, so I'm going to give you the numbers. In the United States, there are at least, the last stats that I have are from like 2020. There are at least 8 million children living with other relatives. Most probably, children living with their grandparents, with their birth parents also in the household. That to me is intergenerational. So you have grandparents, you have parents, and then you have children. So you've got 3 generations living there in the same household.
Okay.
This is different. This is different because birth parents are not there. The birth parents have been removed because of some challenge that they have related to parenting. And then you have the relatives, in this case, the grandparents, raising those children. They are their primary responsibility. They are footing the bills. They are responsible for the child care. they are doing everything. The other birth parents are not there to assist. They're not there. So grandparents are assuming it all.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and that's definitely different from having just grandma down in the I want to say down in the basement, but I don't want it to sound mean.
Don't put her down in that basement.
or she's got the mother-in-law suite out in the back of the property, let's say.
Right.
And then the families
So she still has a life of her own. She can still kind of go and do what she wants to do when she wants to do it. However, when grandma or grandpa have the primary custody, be it now, it may not be legal, it may be informal, but when they have custody of those children and there are no parents around because parents are dealing with whatever the parents are dealing with, they are primarily responsible for everything. They don't get to say, oh, well, I'm gonna leave y'all and I'm gonna go on vacation, or I'm gonna go to the movies, or I'm gonna go to dinner. Mm-mm. If they're going to do those things, they got to take the kids with them, and they're going to pay all of the bills.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are some of the drivers or causes of grandparents raising their grandchildren?
So that's a wonderful question. I've come up with what I call the 10 Ds. This is just a Dr. Glenda Clare thing. This is my thing exclusively. And let me give you a little bit of history related to me in terms of how I even got involved in this. So I gave you the definition of grandfamily being grandparents and other family members raising a relative's child. I got involved with this not because I'm a grandparent, but because I was a cousin. Grandma died, and the child was going to go into foster care. I was at the funeral. I was a cousin, and I said, she can come live with me. So that's how I got involved. That's how my knowledge expanded, which you will find what I have found. Although I'm a behavioral health professional, most of us didn't learn about all this in school. We didn't talk about all of this. So this is new conversation that people are beginning to have. So what are the 10 Ds? Number one on that list is, I know you know what it is drug abuse.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two, so I've got these in the top three. So I've got drug abuse, domestic violence, and then I've got wait a minute, I got to put it in the D kind of a way. So detention as in incarceration. But there are other things that could be on there. Deployment can be on there. Desertion, as in parents just left. Deficiency. Deficiency for me is like that young adult parent, maybe a teen parent, who needed to go off to school or something, or they needed to go to, another state or whatever to get a decent job to pay their bills or whatever. So those are some of the things. But then we've also got deportation. We've also got disability. So there are a number of reasons. However, the top three are drug abuse, domestic violence, and detention, incarceration.
Have these circumstances increased over time? Meaning, if we were to go back to the 1940s or 50s or 30s, whatever we want to go back to, have we seen a trend line where this is all increasing?
I think we have seen that it has increased. We learned a lot of things during COVID. We learned a lot during COVID in terms of how many of these families are put at a disadvantage about some of the issues that they are experiencing that really weren't being I can't talk. Really, we're not being paid attention to before. But now we've kind of got a spotlight on these things and we're beginning to talk about them more. We weren't talking about them before. I know when I went out looking for resources, looking for assistance, looking for all different kinds of things, people weren't thinking about this population at all. I have been part of a national advocacy group for grandfamilies. Most of them are grandparents. There are very few of us that are cousins or aunts and uncles, but mostly grandparents. So I've met grandmothers and grandfathers all over the country. I've met them. They have been Black, they have been white, they've been Native American, they've been Asian. I've met Latino. I've met them all over the country because the group that I have been a part of, the Grand Voices, has representation all over the country.
Oh, good. Well, and I was going to ask you a little bit about that in terms of when I went through school and I took a number of psychology, sociology courses, it almost seemed that the idea or the story of a child being raised by grandparents was really a one-off type topic, meaning that it was such a rare event that it hardly, from what I remember, ever made it into my textbooks as far as like a family model unit or something of study. And so now it seems like between some of the increase in drug use and detention and your D's plus with the COVID, it looks like there's that bigger spotlight that's being put on this type of family unit.
So I think there's a bigger spotlight being put on this family unit now. However, I think that it's always been there. So I grew up in the African American community. Grandmas were living with folks. I grew up around a lot of Italians. They were living with folks. Some of my friends that are Irish American would say they had folks living amongst them too. However, they were living in that intergenerational model that you spoke of. They were not necessarily taking care of these children because mom and dad was off somewhere. There were instances when that happened. However, I think some of that was taboo, and so we weren't talking about it. As the numbers are going up, there's a need to talk more about it because you are now seeing, well, who's going to take care of these children if the relatives are not doing that? And, you know, if they're not going to do it, then the child is in foster care. However, the child can still be in foster care and have grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, cousin taking care of them. So the distinction that I made between kinship and grandfamilies.
Sure. And I do appreciate you touched on the demographic breakdown. Is there any other information around that demographic breakdown that you could share with us as far as maybe percentage or, anything along those lines?
So now a lot of people won't want to hear this, but the majority of families that are doing this are white folks, followed by African American, then Latino, then your Native Americans. So, I think in all honesty is I think that a lot of families are not necessarily represented by statistics because people don't typically go out and say, I'm taking care of, whoever.
Right.
They don't do that. I know I wasn't doing it. I wasn't filling out any paperwork saying I'm the cousin taking care of the cousin. And so I don't think that most people do that. I do think now this is becoming a popular topic. So more and more people are talking about it. Case in point, the Saturday before Father's Day, I was asked to facilitate a discussion dealing with grandfathers raising their grandchildren at a fatherhood conference. That was a highlighted thing. And our room was packed to listen to these men that were talking about their experience. However, just a couple of weeks ago, I went to a press conference. I think I shared that I have been a member of the Grand Voices, which is a group created by a group called Generations United. So Generations United had a recent press conference, and me being that loyal past member, I trucked on to DC to go to their press conference in DC. They had one grandfather that spoke there. So I'm always listening to hear the voices of everybody that's involved in this movement because we all have our territory, and so we need to be able to help the people that are in our areas. There aren't a lot of resources that are available for us. There are not a lot of support groups. And so when we have someone that has knowledge, we need to give examples and share and educate. Because, in a lot of instances, people feel isolated.
Right. Well, and that's one of the biggest things too, that I'm wondering if that's what's starting to change a little bit, because I feel like, to your point, there weren't a lot of resources, and a lot of grandparents probably took on these children as a sense of obligation and weren't necessarily reaching out for community resources and even church resources. Like, people knew that, this child is living with their grandparents, but there weren't resources. And even the law is really, I think, still a little murky around grandparents' rights. And you brought up, like, they may be in foster care to the grandparents, or maybe they're adopted by the grandparents, or maybe it's nothing. It's the abandonment, apparent leaves.
So it's all of the things that you mentioned. It's all of the things that you mentioned. So there continues to be no resources. Very few states have resources. If those people, for the most part, that get resources are those people who have entered the child welfare system. And so there is a limit to resources in the child welfare system. So the child welfare system may help with medical expenses. The child welfare system may give a minimal, and I do mean minimal, amount in terms of other things. So like you still got to feed the child, clothe the child, recreate the child, deal with school supplies, all of that. So they give a minimum amount to deal with those things. There's also an opportunity for respite when you are in the child welfare system. However, the reality when your child is in the child welfare system is that child is a ward of the state. So if the state, for whatever reason, decides, well, we don't like this placement, they can take the child. There are people, so I got legal guardianship. I didn't adopt, but I got legal guardianship. So there are grandparents that go ahead and get legal guardianship. Then there are grandparents that will go for adoption. Now, adoption is a touchy subject with grandparents, especially. And it's touchy because that means that the child's parents are that grandparent's children. And so people it's sensitive because you always want the best for your child. You want your child to succeed. And for you to be able to adopt means that you are cutting off parental rights. You are saying, my child doesn't have any parental rights for this child. That sends a message to your child, to your grandchild. There's a lot of feelings and things that come up with this. And in fact, regardless of whether or not the child is with you informally, with you because they're in foster care, or with you because you've adopted, there's lots of feelings that are involved, anger, guilt, jealousy, all kinds of feelings that come up in these situations, which makes it challenging. However, by the same token, in terms of the child is able to survive and thrive with kin, more so than with anyone else. Because with kin, they are more likely to stay in that placement. Whereas you find some children as young as 5 and 7 years old that have been in home after home after home after home. When they're with relatives, they're more likely to be there and stay. Now, that doesn't mean that they're always going to be there and stay, because there are some behaviors that sometimes if people don't get the support that they need, that they just, they're pulling out their hair and saying, I can't take this anymore. However, the stats that we have is that relatives, especially grandparents, are more likely to stick it out and try to work to keep those children in their homes. Let them know that they've got a family. Let them know that they are loved.
Mm. Yeah, I think definitely from what I understand, or the little bit I understand about family law and things, is that generally the states and counties prefer that a child go with a relative versus going into the system because of some of those same things?
Yes and no.
Yeah, okay.
So there's new school and there's old school. I remember sitting at a table. We were actually planning for a conference. This woman did not know that I was raising my cousin's child. And she said, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And I asked her, what exactly does she mean by that? And she said, if the parent is doing this, there other people are doing these things. So there are some people that have a serious bias saying that, well, they raised the parent. Look at what the parent is doing. However, what we are seeing, and people like me are saying, y'all really need to think about what you say. Because if you are involved in psychology or social work or counseling like me, generally you are in that profession because you saw something from somebody close to you, and that's why you wanted to enter the profession. So if you're saying apple doesn't fall far from the tree, it's like you're pulling up a mirror to yourself. So you might want to watch that. However, something happened that was really important in 2018. The Family First Prevention Services Act was signed into law. It was signed by Trump. The Trump administration was part of this process. It was bipartisan legislation where they actually worked together. Democrats and Republicans worked together to put this in play. And the focus was family. Children need to be with their family. Before you send children out anywhere else, you need to find out if there's someone in the family that is willing to provide childcare, willing to provide care and love to a child that's a member of their family. That's where you need to start. And there are supposed to be resources. Now, I haven't seen those resources yet, but there's supposed to be resources to assist families. Still, there is this major push that, we need to get them all in child welfare. And what's happening over and over and over again is families, when you give out surveys and ask families questions, they time and time again say, we really are not interested in being involved in child welfare. We didn't do anything. The parent did something. We didn't do anything. We don't want to be a part of child welfare. Some families need to be a part of child welfare because they need those resources. Others are probably like me and others and saying, well, I may not have all the resources, but we're going to figure it out. We'll figure it out. Maybe we will not have as much food on our individual plates, but we're going to figure this out, And so that happens. Now, costs are going up. For grandparents especially, this can be a touchy thing because if they've reached retirement, then that means they're going to have to go back to work. If they are living in a seniors community, that means they're going to have to get out and find somewhere else to live because for the most part, senior communities say you cannot have any children that are like living here. They can come visit for a couple of days, but then they need to leave. So that puts grandparents in an interesting position.
I was going to ask you too, is if somebody is starting down this road as grandparents taking custody of a child or grandchild, how would you suggest that they start in to do, let's say, a needs assessment? Do I need to reach out and get some state assistance, or can church and community kind of help out, or can I do it myself? Because I feel like you need a third person kind of in there that can speak some truth to the situation.
So the first thing I would say in terms of guidance is this. It's important to find a lawyer if you can. There are a lot of attached to law schools. There are sometimes, not always, family law clinics. I would go and visit one of those family law clinics because whoever the relative is, they're going to need some information on paper. They need documentation because one of the things that they will find is they can't speak on behalf of that child because they are not the child's parents. So they can't do anything with school. They can't do anything with the doctor. They can't do anything with the dentist. They can't do anything. You need paper to get the child registered for school, to have the teacher call you for the parent teacher conference, all of those kinds of things. In terms of the doctor, even if you're paying cash, they want to know, who are you? You could be a child predator. They don't know who you are. So you need to get some documentation that this child is really yours. You're right. There are limited rights for grandparents and other relatives. There are more for grandparents than there are for other people. I would do a good Google search for my state, because every jurisdiction is different. What are the resources that are in my state? So one thing that came with the Family First Prevention Services Act that I mentioned to you is there's supposed to be the development throughout the country in each state kinship navigation systems. So I would look for whatever state I'm in. So if I'm in Oregon, if I'm in New Jersey, if I'm in Mississippi, I would do a Google search to find out what are the kinship navigation programs in my area. What support groups exist? I would go first to a support group meeting if I could find one. And sometimes you might need to find one online, but I would go to them and say, okay, what are the resources? Where are they? And let them help you figure that out. If I belong to a congregation, I don't know what a person's faith would be, but if I belong to a congregation, I'd say, I need some help. Here's the thing. You've got this child 24/7. You need some days off. You know, you don't even have to go anywhere. You just need somebody to take care of the child so you could just take a long shower or go for a walk without a child, or having a conversation with another adult without the child listening, little things like that. So find out what's available. So we know that a lot of congregations will be able to help with back to school time, where they'll help you with the book bag and the contents of the book bag. I would go to the school counselor at the school. What resources do you have? I didn't expect to bring this child home to live with me. I don't even remember what happens in schools. When my cousin came to live with me, I got a real lesson. Number one, her bus didn't leave to go to school until after I had needed to already be on the road to work. She got out of school every day before I was through with my work day. So I was like, well, where does she go? And then they had, I thought, okay, so the school year runs from August to June or May. They said they hadn't used all their snow days, so they took away time. I was like, Casey, what do you mean she doesn't go to school anymore? So it was always crazy for me. Then the whole thing, in terms of school, what do you mean they don't give them homework? What kind of school is this? And then she and I would have fights because I was like, well, I don't know why they don't give you homework, but I'm giving you homework. You need to do some work. So all of those different kinds of things that you're learning. So you need to get acclimated to school and what they do and how they do it. The same thing is true with the pediatrician. Who are the pediatricians? If you are a grandparent or other relative, haven't had a child in your life for a little while, you haven't used a pediatrician in a while. What immunizations does she need or he need? All of those kind of things. There's lots and lots and lots to learn. And so if you can find a support group, that's the best thing.
Well, yeah, you're definitely going to need it, because just getting your feet under yourself, probably in your case, you're looking at 10, 15-year difference between you and your cousin being in school. But a grandparent...
That's very nice of you to say that.
Well,
it's not true, but that's nice.
Yeah, well, and I'm thinking grandparents, it may be 40, 50 years since they were in high school. And advice that I could give to somebody, a grandson that's 8, 9 years old from when I was in school would probably get that grandson expelled. It would be tough to do that.
It might, plus the other things, so usually people meet and develop relationships, their children go to the same school. Well, if you not have a lot in common,
yes,
you may not.
Yep.
So, there's a lot of different kinds of things to consider, like, for instance, the new math.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, why do you need new math? And all of those kinds of things.
For sure.
And if you're not computer literate.
Oh, yeah. You need to definitely get up on the computer stuff because, one of the things that I don't think we've got time to get into it right now, but it's some of the trauma that the kids go through that are bringing into the relationship that you've got to manage because we've talked a little bit about, hey, the finances and getting the network and getting the paperwork so you can take kids to the doctor, so you can do that stuff. But man, there's some baggage that's coming along with those kids because they've come from very dysfunctional situation.
There's loss, there's grief, there's anger, there's feelings of guilt, there's all that go inward and be somewhat depressed. So you've got a lot of stuff that you need to look at. One of the first things I did when my cousins lived with me was I took her to see a psychologist for some grief counseling. Now, even with that, there was still a lot more to do, because she was a mother. She was the child of an addicted parent. And so she was a child of an addicted parent, and I got custody of her because her grandmother died. So she had the death of her grandmother to deal with. She had the addiction of her mom to deal with. She had the disappointment of finding out that she'd come to live with me when she thought, oh, grandma's dead. I can go live with mommy now. When the child is no longer at the home of their parents, they are relocated. If those other family members don't live in that community, then they lose friends. They lose all of that. So they've kind of just been plucked and moved. And nobody asked them their opinion. Would you like to go? And even if you ask them, would you like to go? It's not like they really have any true decision making here because it's like, well, you got to go somewhere. There's a lot to play with that. And, one of the things that I have noticed that I know, I started a nonprofit to start looking at these issues. And one of the things I have to say that I was guilty initially was I was looking initially at just the adults. And now I'm also looking at children because just like the adults need some place to go, they need a support group. So do the children, because the children can't talk honestly to whoever the relative is that is taking care of them when they get teed and just feel like, oh, this old person telling me to do whatever. They're not my parent. When they have all of those feelings, can they really express them honestly?
Yeah.
Do they have somewhere that they can go that they can express themselves and do some brainstorming with other kids that have the same kind of issues? There's a need for that too. Oh. I don't really see anybody that's doing any of that.
No, and that's one of the things. Hopefully, we'll start to change as we're bringing more attention to the situation of grandparents raising kids and getting all this out in the open so that we can help these kids be healthy. Because I would be surprised if we didn't see a number of these children end up in situations with law enforcement, with detention centers themselves, a lot of that is just the trauma that they've gone through early on and not knowing how to express it, right? It's a lot of aggressive behavior, a lot of anger that's being not channeled in a productive way.
Right. It's misdirected anger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Question I've got for you, and we'll wrap this up, is what can we do as grandparents or as adults in general when we meet grandparents, whether they're in our networks or not, that may be raising their grandchildren? Are there things that we can do and say that can add support and not make them feel awkward or make them feel like the family's got some kind of a fault?
Yes. The first thing I think you should do is go and give that person a big hug and say, you are wonderful. Thank you for doing that. The next thing is to develop a relationship with that person if you don't already have one, and let them know it's okay. You want to go out for a movie or whatever? I can babysit. Now go get a background check first, because I don't want to find out that you're a pedophile. But yes, I can do that. Invite them over to dinner with the children so that they don't have to cook. Just little acts of kindness can help. Letting them know that you support them. I think people finding out that there are people that they can be themselves with, people they can be open and honest with. But I think that's where you start. Just letting them know that you understand that they need some support, and asking them, how can you help? And being sincere, not being someone that says, oh, do you need some help? I would love to help you, but then you never come around to actually provide any help.
Sure.
Following through on that. But yeah, I think those little things, I think that they are the things that really matter.
Oh, that's great advice. Dr. Clare, is there anything I haven't asked you or anything you want to talk about? I know we could I feel like we need to do a part 2 with this conversation, but is there anything?
That would be great, because that whole legal piece is more than a notion. I have seen, so speaking of grandparents, grandfathers in particular, I have seen I've seen the difficulties that they've gone through to get custody sometimes of their grandchildren. I'm going to be honest and say I was very fortunate. I was at a funeral. Social work was there. I asked what's going on. I'm a counselor. They helped. I had a relative that knew child welfare, because I didn't know child welfare. But I had a distant relative that had enough money that she could fly in from California to help me. And she walked me through the process. If I had not known, if I didn't have her, I would have been going around in the dark.
Dr. Clare, I really appreciate you being on this podcast. This has been great information, and it's a great way to start the conversation about this very important topic.
Thank you for having me.
I was super excited that Dr. Glenda Clare came onto our show to talk to us about this important issue about grandparents raising grandchildren. It's really important that we start to identify those people around us that may be going through this situation, because as Dr. Clare said, those grandparents that are taking this responsibility on aren't always prepared for it. And a lot of times there's a lot of family trauma, for lack of a better word, because this isn't the natural course of things. There's those D's that come out that are responsible for the situation that grandparents find themselves in. And we also need to be able to have our eyes and ears open so we can identify those people that have taken on this responsibility. Make sure that we come up beside them, put our arms around them, let them know that we acknowledge what they're doing, let them know that we care. And most importantly, as Dr. Clare said, make sure that we are an actual resource for them. Whether it's babysitting, whether it's taking the family out for an outing, doing whatever we can to make that burden a little bit lighter for those friends and neighbors that might be in the situation of raising grandkids. So until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.